Thank you for the reminder to record. Thank you. Yep. So so there's a um so there's an opportunity for us to meet. So I think we should probably take that opportunity. But yeah, I guess I'll just say, does anyone object to us meeting?
Good idea. No objection.
Seems like a good idea. Yeah, cool. So we're going to be coordinating with the other with the TDGs and possibly the specifically the AU Core Patient Summary Project, who probably needs a session. And we'll divvy up the day. So we'll have to work out which quarter is going to run which session. But yeah, the other groups are still talking about what to do as well. So I think we'll just probably indicate that we will take a quarter and yeah, move ahead with that. Tickets are coming, so I expect they'll probably go out in a little bit of a sequence, just in terms of priority tickets. Probably out to co-chairs and track leads initially, who probably need a ticket to be there, and then things will go out to HL7 Australia members and on the regular work group lists. So that should come through on those lists. I'm actually expecting. I think the co-chairs might get info today or tomorrow, and they've probably got about 24 hours before it goes out to the membership community, but it kind of gives people a chance to sign up. Yeah, so I think I'm not sure how hot this ticket's going to be. So if you are interested, I would recommend getting on there early if possible, just to make sure. Yeah, so that'll come out. I'll try and make sure that comes out on the FHIR Work Group list as soon as possible, so that we know what's going on. And that's about it for that. Yeah, I think we will be obviously looking for getting an agenda together for that session as well. So we'll probably discuss that a bit coming up to the event as to what we're going to cover. We'll probably try and do things that aren't kind of regular issues business, unless there's really meaty things. Probably looking at a bit more overall governance and things that we are much better done face to face. So we'll try and work out a good session for that day. So from that, we go on to AU Core publication reviews. So just to frame this a little bit, as part of publishing FHIR IGs, we did this for AU Base. We did review the QA report for the IG. So that's something that needs to be done to ensure the content is there's no errors or warnings that are unknown or need fixing. So it's basically an opportunity for the FHIR IG facilitators to go through any of those kind of remaining QA issues and explain the reason that they're there. So this is something that's done initially by AU Core, but comes back to us to verify that as a review. So really, we're just reviewing the fact that the work's been done and kind of see and accept, what's been found. So with that, I'll hand over to Danielle, who will talk more about it.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. So I'm the FHIR IG facilitator for AU Core. So I'll go through that. It's going to be pretty similar to what we did for the AU base check last fortnight. But I thought, since this is probably the last time we're going to go through AU Core R1, that I would do a little bit of a wrap up. So we did a mid-year check-in for projects in July, and since we're coming to the end of this project, I thought I'd just give an update across that. Do we have enough time, Brett, for me to do like a quick 10-min kind of here's where we are?
Yeah, I think that would be great actually, because I've kind of bulked out the agenda, but I think this is like number one, so it would be great to get a bit more info. Cool.
All right. So I'll bop through that. If people have questions, feel free to ask them. I'll try not to take too long. I'm aware for a lot of people who attend the FHIR Work Group or the AU Core TDG fairly consistently that you'll have seen all this before. But let's just wrap it all up. So can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right, awesome. So let's just go through AU Core FHIR IG1. I thought we'd just quick recap. Hey, we have a project. What are the FCP activities we've done? And then, of course, end on that last bit, which is FHIR Work Group endorsement of the AU Core TDG's approval of the QA.html out of our publication branch so we can proceed to publication. I'm going to skip over this. I think we're all fairly aware now. This is just an excerpt from the PSS or the project scope statement about the intention for the AU Core IG. That hasn't changed since the mid check-in or through ballot, so that's all the same. But what has changed is where we are. We're at publication phase. When I last spoke to folks, we were just coming through ballot for comment resolution and about to go into ballot for working standard. Now that's happened. There's a little slide later on talking about some of the stats for that, but ballot for working standard is completed. All the reconciliation items have been applied. The publication preparation phase has happened, and we've done that last check through the AU Core TDG to do the walkthrough of the remaining warnings and errors, but there were no errors in the QA.html to accept anything that remained. And we'll go through that later. But that's where we're at. We're about to publish. So just a recap also on the engagement points that come through the FHIR Work Group for a project and where we've kind of looked at things. Kind of half wearing my AU Core hat, half wearing my FHIR Work Group co-chair hat here. So a project starts with project proposal approval. Now, we started in AU Core, as does AU Base, already had existing board approval. So we didn't go through a project proposal process like e-requesting did, like patient summary did, but that already exists. So that is tick and kind of was pre-existing. PSS being the project scope statement, where you, for each release that is undertaken, a scope statement identifying, what's the intention, what are some of the timeframes around balloting, how will this work, is put forward. And that was approved by the FHIR Work Group back in, I think, June last year. And then we have the NIB, which is the Notice of Intention to Ballot, was approved. There's a bunch of prerequisites for that coming in to say that if there was a prior ballot, and for us that was ballot for comment, that all those changes are incorporated and you're meeting all your requirements to date on that. And so it was approved for AU Core to go to working standard ballot because we'd met the prerequisites to do that at that time. Another check we have to do is around the AFMM levels. And those have all been approved through the AU Core TDG and then endorsed by the FHIR Work Group. There's the variance statement, which has also been looked at and balloted. There was a ballot change request on that, which resulted in some changes to the process and updates to the links to identify the versioned process that the variance statement page in core belongs to. And that was applied and has been cited and approved by the FHIR Work Group just at the end of last year. So that was December. And our last check really before publication is the QA.html. And so the AU Core did that in the meeting last week, and we'll go through that today. And I'm looking to have that endorsed, and so that we can move to publication of AU Core. Just a quick refresher. This is the scope. This slide was basically presented at the mid-year check-in. It's not changed. So in between the ballot for comment and when we last talked about what was going to be in AU Core R1, it stayed the same. What has changed is a bunch of refinements. So essentially what we've done is we've gone through a bunch of connectathons and testing and the ballot for working standard, which has resulted in almost all the artifacts moving to FMM2. The exception for that is AU Core request a capability statement, which was not a surprise. So that remains at AFMM1. And throughout the life of the AU Core projects, possibly the next one, that might move to AFMM2. Membership is about the same, which is great. We've got over 400 members from over 200 organizations. I've kept this number at 6 co-chairs because that was the count at the time at which we did R1, noting there has been an interim co-chair appointment in our last meeting from Ricardo, who is now joining the co-chairs from the Australian Digital Health Agency. So he's coming on board starting this week. So that's pretty cool. And the percentage of membership is about the same from when we saw this in the mid-year check-in, where it's predominantly industry. And then you've got large portions of government and health professionals with some universities, some unknowns, we don't know, consumers or consumer advocates, and then sparked percentage. And there's quite a degree of crossover between the TDG and the CDG. So I'll just do a quick run through of the FCP activities. For AU Core, that's been run through the AU Core Technical Design Group as the responsible work group, which is a subcommittee of this one. And then we've had roughly fortnightly meetings. We've had quarterly face-to-face meetings. Some of those have been all day. Some have been as part of the Connectathon work group kind of activity. A whole bunch of information sessions that were done as needed. There was a period of time we were doing those weekly, like when we held Conformance Fridays to get through our understanding around the use of must support and obligation and what it really means to implement AU Core. We've had connectathons kind of approximately quarterly. So it's been about 3 to 4 a year. There've been some sparked face-to-face events. And we've gone through 2 ballot activities, both for comment and then for working standards. And what that looks like in terms of activities is about 59 Zoom calls, 3 sparked events. I've got this 12 over there because I forgot to delete it. Oops, you can ignore that. We've done a ballot for comment and a ballot for working standards. We've had 6 face-to-face meetings. We've done 3 connectathons, and there've been 29 e-votes, which I thought was an interesting number that I just surface here. So they're kind of the numbers of the activities we've gone through. In terms of publication history, so we've taken a bunch of snapshots of AU Core as it's gone through. So majority of these are either to service a connectathon. So you can see that here on where we've brought these out for connectathon. And then we've also had a couple of other things. Either we've gone into a testing event or there was an early review that we held way back, I think, June 2023, where we wanted to do a very early community review and get some feedback on direction prior to doing the ballot. I think the things really that are most recent of interest was we had the 100 ballot, which is the ballot for working standard. And then in between that ballot and now, there was a connectathon, and we generated a snapshot for that had the normative changes applied from AU core, so that could go through and be confirmed and finish off testing for AFMM 2, which was pretty successful.
Do you mean the normative changes from AU base?
I mean the normative changes for AU core.
Okay.
So these are the March for ballot for comment stats. When we put it out for the first time, there was 199 pieces of JIRA feedback, which was pretty amazing community response. You went through and reviewed that. It was interesting to look at that there were issues that were raised from 22 different individuals across 11 different organizations. And we had a higher number of voters than we had things being raised, which I think is actually a fairly successful kind of demonstration of the ballot process, where if something already exists, you don't need to raise it yourself. So that was cool. And of course, all of that was then applied and reconciled and then applied prior to doing the ballot for working standards. And here's the changed numbers. So in terms of this, we had overall about half. So we went from the working standard of having 199 issues raised to 108 issues raised. While I don't have the stats here, it was interesting to note that a number of those were, I think, revisiting the same concern. Sometimes we'd made a change through ballot for comment that took must support off something. And then in ballot for working standards, someone went, oh no, I think we should have must support on that. So that was interesting. I think from memory, there's about 15% of issues were looking at the same element and proposing the opposite of what had just been worked through ballot for comment. That was all worked through. And so in terms of reconciliation, that was completed and all the issues were applied, have now been applied. And so we are in progress for publication. And that last step for that is going through the QA branch. I know that a bunch of people on the line were there at the AU Core TDG last week and have already seen this, but we'll go through it a little bit again and I guess talk to any questions before we move, or I move, that we endorse the AU Core TDG's acceptance of that. I thought I wanted to call out here just before we actually go open the file that AU Core, which builds off AU base, so it reuses AU base profiles through inheritance, through using derive, and then places additional constraints. And that means that it inherits all the AU base information and warnings for those artifacts. So in fact, the majority of what we see in AU Core, which is just placing constraints on top of base, is already, I guess, is already defined or inherited from base. So most of these will be the ones that we actually looked at a fortnight ago when we accepted the AU base QA.html. There is one unique AU Core warning, and that is because AU Core defines a set of conformance rules around missing and suppressed data. And part of that definition is about the use of the data absent reason extension. And there is an example in AU Core that demonstrates that. And therefore, there's a warning in ID Publisher where we have, instead of providing an actual reference to a requester, which is mandatory, we've used the defined extension data absent reason. And ID Publisher is saying, hey, you actually don't have a reference here, which is correct. That's what ID Publisher should be throwing a warning on. So that was accepted from the AU Core Technical Design Group as correct behavior, both from the IG and from what we expected IG Publisher to do, as flag something to be checked. So I'm just going to pop to the qa.html now. So this is our publication branch. It's what we looked at with AU base, but it'll look at for all the other specs is that when you go to publish, you need to apply all your changes, get everything ready, and then do a proper publication branch, which is where all changes are complete, and then come through and look at the qa.html and make sure that that is accepted as appropriate. So this was reviewed. There are, I'll just say, 0 errors. There are only information and warning remaining. And if we look at, where's that one again? Suppressed. Aha, here we go. Suppressed. So most of these, and I'm happy to do a more detailed scroll if we're interested, but I'm going to skip over a bunch of these and just go, this is inherited from AU base. This is inherited from AU base, although it's information. This is information about capability statements. This was accepted by AU Core TDG previously and through AFMM 1 decisions. That's about the use of conformance extension. And at any point, if people want me to go into more detail, we can. This has been talked about a couple of times. This is the information that has popped in recently around the ENAU for SNOMED, which only recognises ENs. So when that's passed through, it says, hey, I don't know what that is. That's being worked through. Michael Osborne is following that up. So if you're interested in that, have a chat to Michael. That's just more information. I'm going to skip past the information because it's really where we only need to accept the warnings, and that's been looked through. This is inherited from AU base. That's the multiple profile thing. We've looked at that many times in AU base FHIR Work Group meetings. PBS concepts we've talked about, and that's AU base. We've got the best practice things we went through. That's, again, same thing from ID Publisher. This is the overall set from publication artifacts we don't use. They're HL7 international artifacts. So there's a warning in ID Publisher to say, hey, maybe you need these. We don't use them in HL7 Australia. And then finally, we come down to this one, which is where we have used the data absent reason extension to demonstrate a missing requester. And that's the set of warnings and information in AU Core. Is there anything people wanted me to go into more detail on before I propose that we endorse the AU Core TDG's acceptance of this? Righto. Oh, good to see, Michael. That's great. It'll be fixed in the next validator for the language code, the ENAU. All right. Well, I'm going to motion that we endorse the AU Core TDG's acceptance of the QA.html for AU Core and allow it to move to publication.
Right. So motion was on the table. Do I have a seconder?
I'd like to second that, Doshi.
Thanks, Lucy. Second. So just any further discussion? Nope. Okay, I might launch a poll for this one to take the vote. You fire that up. Cool. Hopefully that's, yeah, preparation, great. Give people a last chance, just have a few more if you're interested in voting. Countdown 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Great. That's everyone, I think. I'm going to end the poll. So we have in the final vote, share the results. We have 14 affirmative, 1 abstention, and 0 negative.
I was unable to vote, Brett,
Oh,
so that's plus
what would you
one
like to go
for
Plus one?
affirmative. Thanks.
Plus 1 affirmative, so that's 15 affirmative. Is that right? Yes, 15 affirmative and 1 abstention. Thank you. Great.
I don't have much more. There's just links. I'll put these slides up in a second. I'll stop sharing. One of the stats I didn't have that I wanted to share with everyone is that altogether, there's been 371 pieces of JIRA feedback that's been addressed. A lot of those are through ballot for comment. So 199 through ballot for comment, 108 in the working standard, but also 64 JIRA issues through the continuous feedback mechanism. So just surfacing through meetings and people raising things has also been addressed through R1. So that's pretty nice.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I think that's a very clean QA report, really. I think that was really good. And I think it's you know, I think it's demonstrable what a good community participation looks like with the AU core content there, because it's had a lot of eyeballs on it. It's had a good workout. It's been tested at connectathons. So yeah, really good to get the release out. So I think that will lead us onto being able to publish with that acceptance.
Yeah, so I guess next steps, when these minutes are available, I'll finish the publication request form. I'll send that to the publication manager for HL7AU, aka Brett, to publish that release branch. So I guess we might expect it to be published maybe today, maybe tomorrow. I guess it depends on how fast the minutes are done. And then comms, I guess, will come out from various things going, here it is.
Terrific. Yeah, that's
Cool.
good. And I think yeah, and I think AU Core is the first non-AU base release of a working standard. So it's nice to have a downstream spec that exists as well. So that's really good. It's a bit of a milestone. And yeah, first working standard from the accelerator. So that's good too. Terrific. Well, we might move on. That's great. So I've got we're on time. Excellent. We've got some items here that this came through as issues. I think Michael Osborne's going to lead us through these ones. So there were some issues raised with some queries on some of the content and examples. So it's just worth discussing to see if there was any action required or in terms of these examples. Michael, did you want to share or did you want to?
Could I share my screen?
Yeah, you sure can.
Okay. Okay, allow. All right, so this came up as a result of a terminology review that I did actually in October and then again in January, where onto server, sorry, I should just ask, can everybody hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So it came up when onto server failed to validate this code, so IFXB, passing in this URL or URN. And then when I had a look, the actual code system and CTS, it has a URI. So this is, if you can see this PowerPoint, the actual URL is air vaccine code formats under human services, but it does have an identifier that is that URN and that OID. So I put it to Zula and I asked Jim and Graham and Lloyd, and they all said that if you've got a valid URL, like in the naming system, you've got a URL, not just an OID, then you must use that URL. to identify the code. So what I'm proposing is that we change those two examples to use that URL in the system field instead of the OID. So that's pretty much it. If you wanted to go and check that Zillup chat out, that's there. I can probably pop that in the pop that into the chat. But happy to take questions there. There's one from Danielle.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd like us to discuss in a minute this on an in principle basis. And there's a little bit of a difference, I think, between, or a qualification we need to recognize that just if any URL exists, that's very nice. I think what we need to be understanding and agreeing is that where there's a canonical code system published. So in this particular case, this is published officially, like this is the official FHIR representation endorsed by Services Australia for the AIR codes. So it's not just any code system, it's the official one, which means that for any carrying of AIR vaccine codes in a FHIR format, it shall use that URL that is published from the official canonical code system resource, or it's considered invalid. FHIR. Basically, it doesn't meet the rules for the code system for codes when they're supplied, according to the data type. This, however, presents something, because I really wanted to talk about this in principle, because when we come to PBS codes, right, and when we come to MBS codes, we're having that discussion. If there is an official code system resource for that, then that answers our question of in a FHIR format, what do you use?
I think it's a little more technical than an official code system resource. It's an official code system identifier or something or other like that.
No, it's
Because you might not-
codesystem.url.
But I'm thinking you might not have actually a FHIR resource with that ID. Is that, so are you talking about an official code source FHIR resource, or are you talking about an official code system?
Code system with capital C, capital S, the FHIR resource. If
Yep.
there is a canonical FHIR resource code, a canonical code system FHIR resource for a terminology, whatever is in codesystem.url has to be the value used, or it's not valid. FHIR.
Okay. Yep. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, it was a good call because code system lowercase c, code system capital C. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing. Any other comments?
Can we just pop to, just to really confirm that it's the codable concept, like data type for what you put in system and what goes in, AU core. What we've got, I'll see if I can find a link just to cite that. Here. So I'll put that in the chat. So there's only ever one correct URL. RI.
So our examples in AUBase,
Mm.
whilst technically not breaking any rules in the profile, because we only have preferred bindings anyway, are not really a demonstration of good practice, right?
I actually think now they're a defect. If we take the fact that if there's a canonical code system published, it isn't valid to have the OID form. So
Because they're linked that way already in the code system.
yeah, it's just a defect now.
Yeah,
it's
okay.
not a change request. That's
Oh,
the
well,
difference.
that
It's
makes
now a defect.
the decision a bit easier.
Yeah, if we recognize that principal basis that once there's a canonical, like SNOMED publishes SNOMED, I know there's an OID out there, but in FHIR, you shall never ever use the OID for the code for SNOMED's URL. And the same for this case. Now there is an official code system resource endorsed by, Services Australia that says this is the representation, that you have to always use that URL in the URI.
So at that point, OI just becomes an alternative identity
It's for
identifier, basically.
So you can only ever use it in non-FHIR based, non-FHIR, basically.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I've heard the words. Do we want to make a motion just to decide on those issues?
I'm willing to move that those 2 FHIR issues be moved forward and fixed in base, the next version, whatever, CI. Yep. Sorry, I better be a bit clearer than that. Be fixed in the next version of FHIR, a FHIR AU base.
I think if we recognize them as defects, that's just an automatic from turning them into technical corrections. So if we agree with the in-principle decision that that's what it means, then they just become technical corrections. Yeah.
Sure, Andy.
Just a query. Have we looked across others and this is the only examples where this has been done?
In AU base.
So it's the only ones.
Yeah.
So in AU base, they're the only ones that popped up in my validation of all of the terminology. Now, it's not to say that other Services Australia artifacts out there in implementations aren't using that void instead of the URL, but in the actual AU base IG, they're the only 2 I could find.
Okay.
So I think I take Danielle's point that if we make an in-principle decision that it should work the way it's supposed to work, that kind of lets us deal with these as technical corrections in the long term. So if we ever find any further instances, we can just apply that as a technical correction. So
that's that's what I'd like. I guess friendly amendment to change it to being these 2 specific change requests to agree that that is what the requirement is, and therefore make the fixes
as they remotion.
You want me to remotion that? Or
yeah. Let's get it for the minute.
So, in principle, to follow the rule as in the chat about code system URIs being the URL if it's in the code system artifact. I'm not. Daniel, can you clean that up for me a bit? Sorry,
I can. Let's try for the motion is to accept that where a canonical code system for a terminology is published, I'm just typing this just in case, the only valid value for system in coded concepts in FHIR is the value published in the code system dot, is it URL or URI?
URL. We call it a URI, but it's .url. Yeah.
So does that work? Is that a summation to accept that
Yes.
where a canonical code system for a terminology is published, the only valid value for system encoded concepts in FHIR is the value published in the code system.url. So I've popped that in the chat.
Okay, I'm going to move that. Exactly what Danielle put in the chat.
Okay.
Can I second that?
Hang on, can you? Sorry, I'll second.
Yeah, thanks. I assumed you would.
Yeah.
All right. I'll. Any further discussion on that one? Let me run a poll. I don't hear any. So let me. Oh, sorry, Richard. Yeah.
I'm just being. I think I'm. Look, tell me if I'm being excessively picky. Where this says that basically we're going to accept a part of the specification.
Yes.
And
Because
that's sort of a strange thing to say. We're going to accept part of the specification. Perhaps it's more like we accept that we're I don't know. We recognise this part of the specification, or we acknowledge that we have to make changes because of this part of the specification. Am I just being too picky?
No, I think it's a valid point. It's not like you can say we do not accept this rule in FHIR. So I think
And that's
I
it.
think this
What
is
we're
more
saying here is, hey, look, here's a rule we missed. Let's do something about it.
yeah, and I think that's where fixing these two issues is the paramount thing that we're doing, and to note that in future, if a use is made which does not follow, that is recognised as not following it, then we will correct it.
do you want to put that in the chat, Andy?
Yeah, I'm not as good as you, and I didn't
I
actually
think
write that.
you've changed the words there, Danielle, to acknowledge.
Oh, I changed it to acknowledge, but it's not what
Yeah.
was proposed from the most recent wording change from Andy.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy to focus on except to fix the two references that Michael has discovered in AU base, and that we will regard any future fixes of the same pattern as a technical correction.
I get you. So you just want this noted in the minutes that's what we'll do, and then we'll just accept that the changes will be made. So maybe we could just go back to motioning. Can we just have this noted in the minutes as the position of the committee? I think that's fine, and then we go back to just accepting. I think we just go back to accepting the changes.
Because I don't think, therefore, if we've accepted this and there are no objections, that this is the interpretation, or we acknowledge that, then we don't have to motion to agree each of these two fixes. Because as we've said,
No, they become
if we've
technical
already gone,
corrections.
this is how it works.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have to fix them.
All right. Well, I have a motion on the table. So we had friendly word amendments. So I think the words are in the chat. So I'll just move ahead to take that poll to accept this motion. Okay, I think we have people responding. No, there. All right, 90% plus one affirmative from Dushi. Last chance. I think that might be everyone anyway. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. So we have 16 affirmative and 1 abstention, 0 negatives.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Michael. Great. So I'll go back to the agenda. Okay. So move through there. So we are returning to our MBS PBS discussion. This is the issue originally raised by Marika about padding on these code systems. Can anyone remind me where we're up to? I think we're up to confirming usage, weren't we?
Yeah. So I've gone ahead and thank you, Danielle, and I know that we have some members from the e-requesting group here. Thanks for circulating that to the respective groups. We ended up with, I'll just post a link to the actual polls that we had in the chat, but we had 13 distinct respondents, 4 PBS item numbers. Everyone is using the canonical URL, which given the discussion we've had is great. But the majority are using unpadded values, with some people using, so 78% are using unpadded values, with additional people either using a mixture or just padded values. So that will be interesting to work through. For MBS item numbers, we've got a pretty even split of people using the OID and some MBS online domain for the respondents for that. And the majority of people are passing unpadded values for MBS, though some are passing padded values. The biggest reason that people decided to go with passing modified versus unmodified values was how the data was available direct from source. With a note, I think, from Angus saying that we suspect the Medicare Online required the padded as the system, as the current systems accept the padded values. So that's kind of where we've landed with usage. Richard, did you end up going up and following up on your action items to?
Yes, I did. So I had a look at the stuff, and basically the FHIR mobile gateway doesn't change the format of it. It doesn't do any validation. It doesn't do any transformation on the code. So whatever comes in, it just lets it go through. And so it depends upon the source systems. The specifications. So what have we got? In the specs, the MBS item codes are specified as padded. The PBS is unpadded. We've got examples in the specs that include both padded and unpadded for them. So they're not consistent with that, but there's, basically do either. The system behavior just doesn't, the gateway doesn't care.
The code system URLs the gateway uses.
It's okay for yeah, I'll pop my notes in the chat here. There we go. How's that gone through? Ah, nice and ugly. Enter. Is that no? There to send. Oh, I've got too many characters in that, so let's break that up a bit. Control X. First bit. Oops. Bit. There we go.
Thanks, Richard.
That's great.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, I mean, yeah, really, it's like, the system lets anything go through. The stuff from Services Australia is going to almost certainly be padded because Services Australia use padded. The stuff from anybody else, it could be either.
Cool. And Richard, for the Service Australia data, do they use the URL or do they just use the OID?
Oh, I'm not sure. I should check that. It's about what they actually do as opposed to what they're supposed to do. I should check what they actually do.
Background.
Did
Yeah.
do you know if the gateway got updated for what they send through to the R4, or is it still on the older original definition?
I don't think the gateway's been updated on that.
So the original agreement with Services Australia had them sending through the URN OID forms for PBS and MBS. That being said, they get transformed before they're stored. So since they're actually stored in CDA, it's they were and then stored in some other formats, yeah. But there was a move for Services Australia at some point to be moving to a FHIR format, which was proposed to include the appropriate URLs for those rather than the OIDs.
Yep. I don't know whether they're actually doing that. That's something I will say something.
Wow. Okay. So we've got some background. Thanks for all the work, everyone. That's really very good information. So I guess the question is, what now for what we're going to recommend? I mean, we do have a PBS artifact. We don't have an MBS artifact at this point. So it might be worth splitting activity, because we can probably talk about PBS and what the content we have now more easily.
Shall we sort out PBS or go through what's next for PBS first before we start talking about MBS, just to try and get something along the line?
Yeah, because I think MBS will require drafting new things, and a URL selection, and yeah, some of those things. So
so for PBS, everyone was using the canonical URL, but we did have mixed usage. Given this, so for padded versus unpadded data, given this, is there a way for us to, I guess, in my opinion, we would have two choices. We could either separate the OID that refers to the unpadded data from the artifact, or we could, I'm not sure how to do this in FHIR, but we could add a note that says we will accept unpadded or padded data for this canonical URL. I'd love any advice from this, I guess, the CSIRO team.
Comes a bit problematic having, I'm not sure how you have two codes for the one concept. I don't know.
You wouldn't. I think we have to go down the route of removing that identifier for this instance. And if we were to have a separate code system resource for the padded, then we could make decisions about what goes in codesystem.url for FHIR purposes.
Yeah. Does the padded do the canonical URLs for both of the code systems need to be unique?
Yes.
Yeah. It's mainly the mechanics of the code itself. It's problematic to have multiple code definitions. It makes it harder for the it's not a regular FHIR terminology problem at that point. It's a bit strange. Yeah. So I think it does. Yeah, I think what Danielle suggested makes sense. And what I think you originally suggested, Marika, in your ticket, which was to detach the OID.
Given, so this is noting there will be potentially breaking changes for there's a vote by Charlotte Howard on the modified or padded values, but the majority are using unpadded values and passing unpadded values for PBS. Given that, can I move that we update the artifact for the PBS item code to detach the OID that refers to the padded data or the modified data?
Yep, that's the motion.
I'm happy to second that.
I got a second from Danielle. Any further discussion on that one? Heath?
I know it's not publicly accessible, but is there a code system using that URL that exists somewhere?
You mean a code system with values? Do you mean a code system with values? Or just a code system resource?
That's an interesting statement. Yes, there is. maintained inside CSIRO and NCTS walls, but it's not available for IP purposes. Services Australia does not yet publish one, and I expect that would eventually, if it ever surfaces, come through NCTS.
So to you, Richard, yes, code system resource. And Danielle, when you say within CSIRO walls, as in CSIRO authored?
Yes, so there's tooling that's maintained it, and some of it is part of like mapping. You know how the maps are maintained between SNOMED
yep.
and PBS and things like that. Behind it, behind all of that magic, is a PBS code system, and it is non-padded, and it uses
It's
the
non-padded.
URL. Yes.
Okay. So basically,
So the
this
official one,
proposal
yeah, if we ever
is
published, would be non-padded.
which is aligned with what you've got behind closed walls.
Yeah.
Okay. But we don't know if Services Australia has one behind closed walls.
They don't. There have been a number of approaches on when and how or if the publication of PBS forms part of the services of NCTS, and that's beyond, I think that goes into Department of Health and Digital Health Agency and CSIRO around how that happens and gets maintained. To this point, it hasn't yet made it onto the work program and with official agreements, but that continues to be discussed. I'd like it to be picked back up again and to push for that to be done. And
Okay, so there's official discussions about how to do it and
yes,
about doing it.
yes,
But it hasn't progressed to the point where there actually is something official. Okay, thank you.
yeah, correct. It's the what would it look like? What is its URL and all that kind of stuff is defined. The approvals and the, I guess, the official agreements between entities and the publication on behalf of another is what is yet to be fully agreed.
And now it's going to be maintained and all that. Who's going to pay for it and all that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So we do have a motion to remove the OID from the current PBS code system artifact.
Should we have authority to make this motion, given that it's all that other discussion that Danielle?
It's an AU-based artifact.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think like we live in the world where if there is an official publication, we would probably fall into line with whatever that was. Right. So because that would be actually a source and the authority source for the coding. Yeah.
Just to follow on from what Heath said, we do not have the authority to say that you can't send unpadded. That you can't send padded using the OID. Like the OID is defined as the code system for padded, basically. So that remains something that exists. It's not defined in AU base.
And you could still do that.
Yeah. So we don't have the
could send
authority to
padded.
go, this isn't a real OID or unpadded is not a real thing. We can't do that, but we can certainly clarify the code system artifact as being the non-padded PBS concepts.
But using their URL, pbs dot whatever.
Yes, that's for
allowed to do
non-padded.
that?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So we have that motion on the table. Last chance for discussion. Nope. I will kick off a poll. What's up? Okay, polls up. Okay, 80% there. Okay, last chance. Cool. And I have a +1 affirm from Dushi, so we have, I'll end the poll now. We have 12 affirmative and 5 abstentions, 0 negative. Thanks for that. Great. So I think that's a outcome for PBS for the moment. Great. So I guess the questions that remain are there any more actions needed on the PBS material, and what to do about MBS?
That addresses the issues that I had with the PBS. So I'm happy
with that now?
yeah,
I
unless
have a-
anyone has other issues.
I have a question about that PBS OID. Where is it stated that that PBS OID means padded or unpadded? The only things I've found on that particular PBS OID are silent about padding and unpadding.
So it's in the Australian Digital Health OID repository that it states that it is padified. Let's make up English. That sounds about right. So here is the link to the repository, and I don't know if I can put in screenshots, but these are the two I cannot post screenshots, but yeah.
Hang on, but that PBS one, that's a different OID, isn't it?
So
that's a 22. That's
the 21 is for the MBS.
MBS. Yeah.
And then the 22 is for the PBS. So the
I
OID.
thought, yeah, but the OID we're removing is I've got myself confused. The OID we're removing is the which OID? I thought the OID we're removing ended in 8.
No, it ends in 22.
Fine, good. I'm happy then. I was looking at something which pointed to an OID ending in 8, and I'm thinking that one doesn't say what I thought it did. So good.
Yes, I think it's these words that are
yeah. No,
leading you down the path.
This OID shouldn't be there. I found my way to a place where it was pointing to a different OID, and I got confused. Thank you.
Great.
No
so that's great. Thanks, Marika. Yeah, so I think we're happy with PBS. So MBS, similar problem. Yeah.
Yes.
Except we don't have an artifact at all. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess given what we've just done for PBS, I guess my motion would be that we publish an AU base MBS code system and value set. And I guess part of that would involve seeking clarification on what official URL is appropriate to use, but not have the artifact that we're publishing linked to the padded OID in any way.
And Danielle?
So to follow on from that, and I think I'm happy to progress this, but a part of the prereq for that is so how PBS got defined. Both the OID and the URI agreement was done by the agency in negotiation with Services Australia. So I think that has to be done again with the agency approaching and agreeing with Services Australia what the official canonical OID is for this content. Canonical, sorry, URL. Apologies. We can propose one. I think that's how we did it with PBS. I think it was discussed in the predecessor of the FHIR Work Group, and we went, this would be nice, and the agency went ahead with those negotiations and discussions.
Okay. So do you think we should have that chat now about what to propose?
Yes, and then also ask the agency representative to take that away.
Great. So looking at we probably want to keep things in the same style. This is the PBS one.
There's a slight question here on, does MBS include DVA?
Is there a reason it shouldn't include DVA?
I think that depends on some concepts and how you're deciding whether or not it's both MBS and DVA or just MBS.
If it
items.
is just MBS, we'll want another one for the DVA code. So there's sort
Yeah.
of like different legal entities have authority over the different codes, but they tend to run through the Services Australia system as if they're interchangeable.
Okay.
So Services Australia doesn't distinguish, but the owners of the codes are probably jealous about their ownership of the separate codes, and there's different legislation behind the codes.
Yeah, and so practically though, when there's a distribution of MBS, does it include DVA items?
Good
That's
question.
Probably a question for the vendors. I don't know how it's distributed now, right?
I don't know. I mean, if
I
it's
think for the
distributed by
MBS, for implementers for the MBS, I think they just download it directly from the Services Australia website.
I
So
would
my
expect
question-
that Services Australia probably isn't interested in the difference.
So are you saying, Marika, that it's one file you're downloading with both codes, and is there anything special to actually distinguish one code from the other?
I haven't actually looked at this in detail, so I couldn't answer definitively. I have a suspicion that what you would download is all the same. I worry that it would be challenging to distinguish between DVA codes and Medicare codes in certain implementations.
Given
I
that
know of one difference, an example where that's not the same. So MBS, there's one code for non-MBS items that DVA will accept through their payment system. So that's the only exception I know of where it's PBS and DVA are different.
Could we
Yes.
could we get an action here and maybe Michael, if you're happy to take that, to do an investigation and like come back and propose, because I think that's where we're all going, that it's all the one and it should all be the one URI, and also maybe propose what the URI should be for it.
Yep, I can do that. I'll do up a Confluence page.
That sounds great, because I think, if we have all that info laid out, that will make things easier. And I think there's some practical questions. Go on.
And Michael, I was going to say, just because they process a code only for DVA doesn't mean it's not an MBS code. Like
that'll be in the Confluence page.
Yeah. I was never aware of it being divided into DVA codes and MBA codes. They're just MBA codes, and then you decide whether you're claiming against DVA or the MBS. Yeah, and I'm sure there's a rule that says this code can't be claimed unless it's DVA, but that doesn't mean the code is now suddenly in a completely different value set.
Yeah.
It could be right there, Angus.
Yeah, and obviously we do have the distribution that currently exists, which has some content, right? But we can we know how it's distributed in non-FHIR format. Yeah, cool. Well, we'll just take that as an action on Michael.
Sounds brilliant. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Brad.
Awesome. Oh, that's awesome, Marika. Thanks for following up. And yeah, that was a really useful survey as well to get some real input. Great. Anything last out on that one? No. Great. Great. So we have about 12 minutes left. I might just throw this next item out, and we probably won't get to an answer necessarily, but it's just something to think about in the near future. So I just added this one just to follow up on some of the decisions made from the AU-based ballot. So we had, I've just listed 3 draft 0 artifacts there that we had, service request coverage and vaccine serial number. These were things that are not in the current 5.00 release because they were not yet at FMM1. So I think there was, these were deferred. So it was just to assess looking at prioritizing these and perhaps judging how much input is needed to get these to FMM1. And mainly with the idea of saying, yeah, what activities should we do to move these forward? So I know probably that you're requesting crowd is looking at service request and coverage as being something relevant, and it would make their life pretty difficult to publish a working standard unless those things are in place. I put words into your mouth, St. Angus and Andy.
Oh, sorry, Brett. I drifted off. I wasn't listening.
That's all right. I was just saying, e-requesting will need service request and coverage probably sorted, because you need that in AU base to refer to, right?
Yeah, we definitely use both.
Yeah. So they haven't made the working standard at this point because they're only at FM0. So we would like to get, I think what we would aim to do is get some of these to FMM1 so that they can be published in the next version of AU base. So yeah, I think that would be.
You
so
mean
the question
published?
is like
You published in in AU base next year, not in one of the intermediate ones before then.
Well, it depends. We can basically the FMM decision is one we make as a committee, so we can make that at any time. But for it to be available for e-requesting, if e-requesting is deciding to publish as a working standard, they can't refer to things that aren't in the AU base spec proper.
Oh, right. Okay. So if we make it,
yeah.
if we make it one and then put it into a intermediate snapshot of base, then it becomes available for them.
Well, they can refer to CI at the moment because they're all present in the CI build, but there's no actual release, and they can't. It'll need to be in a working standard release at FMM1 for them to actually.
It would have to be
able to publish
balloted
a
at the same
standard.
time.
Yeah, it has to be balloted.
So if
and
we're
get
going for
FMM1.
July, August, we would have to do a AU base in July, August.
Yeah, which I think we would do
Which
anyway.
is currently the
just
plan,
to carry things. Yeah.
Can I just say is a little bit scary. It's looking like all our specs are going for ballot in that August period. So EREC's going for working standard ballot, AU base and core. And patient summary will go ballot for comment in that it's August into September is the ballot period.
Yeah. So you book a holiday.
Managing focus and attention is going to be difficult with so much stuff happening at that one time.
Yeah, there'll be a bit to do. Yeah, and I mean AU base will go to ballot at the same time, because especially with multiple specs downstream, because so we can support changes.
So is the suggestion that these things need some work or just a review and possible acceptance as they are?
I think that's probably they're probably different answers for the different things. So yeah, I think this was mainly just to get some attention on them. I think service request was relatively developed. It was like a reworking of the existing diagnostic service request and made more general. So there may be a few extra questions. I think there were some questions about this binding and a few things to answer.
So did we want to schedule that assessment for the next meeting to confirm if we think it is sufficiently complete that we can tag it FMM1 or identify what other things we think need to happen?
Yeah, Yeah, I think that would be my goal. I think would be to get it on the agenda. So if people are happy with that, I think service request is probably sufficient. And like, but I think putting on the agenda, I'd like people to have a look at it before we talk about it.
The coverage codes was also something that was work in progress, wasn't it?
Yeah, coverage is
I
very
just had a look
light.
at coverage.
Yep.
It's probably doesn't have enough in it to be a level 1, you'd think. Isn't it? Aren't
I
things
think
meant to
that's
be
why
more
it's
comprehensive?
It's the codes
Yeah,
that
I'd
we
agree
were
with
working
that.
on.
yeah.
Well, didn't we get far with that?
Yeah, we have advice. We got as far as giving advice on what you should use which code for. It's already built into coverage, the binding, because it's we got. So this is for.
I mean, maybe that guidance is enough, and that's all it needs. That we don't actually need to make any changes
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
the programmed part of the structure definition. Maybe it just
I know, there's
needs
no
guidance.
are there identifier profiles in there?
Yeah. We have a set.
Oh yeah, there's identifier
Yeah.
profiles, some guidance.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we can't finish it today,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, we
So
can put that
that's
on the agenda for next
yeah.
fortnight.
I think there's probably more to coverage that we haven't like, and I think too, I'm not sure we're going to cover all the ins and outs of coverage, so I think it's more, can we get it to a usable point? And I imagine there'll be more things coming in.
From an e-requesting
we-
perspective, it's mainly those codes.
Yeah, okay.
The identifiers are not relevant.
You wouldn't use them.
You're not specifying them in the coverage for this specific request. It's just
When you put your Medicare number.
guidance around who to bill. It's billing guidance is the way it's described.
Medicare number goes on the patient, wrongly or rightly.
Oh, okay.
Or all of them go on there, and then when you work out with, given that
Right.
guidance, you go and get the right one off the patient.
But the major missing one is the code, and that's the thing that we'll have to have some consistency to.
Is there a reason we didn't create a value set?
We didn't want to restrict it in A base anyway.
We
Because we've
don't
already
have to
got,
restrict it. It's just more.
it's already preferred. So we just inherited that preferred.
Can we move it to extensible?
That's a discussion.
We don't
Let's have that
do
discussion.
extensible bindings. It's not really an
Not
AU
in
based
AU
sort of
base,
thing.
not
That's an
normally.
AU core sort of thing.
Yeah. So
You want
this
an
might
AU
carry
core
through into
coverage.
a core coverage exactly. So yeah, I think this is the discussion for AU base about how many things we can say. Yeah. Anyway, I think we're not going to get to an answer, but so I'll just take, I guess, an action. We'll put service request and coverage onto the agenda for upcoming meetings. Maybe the next one, maybe the one
It is
after.
possible that AU coverage, AU coverage is going to be a really light thing because there's really not much more we can say at AU base.
Yeah, because we ended up just
We
doing an
need to be
advisory.
convinced of that.
Yeah.
Should we pop another poll out to see who's implementing it? I know we've got e-requesting who's going through it, which is awesome. But is there anything else that people have implemented this for to I guess cover off? Is there anything else we need to look at?
Yeah, that's good. Any volunteers for that action? No.
Pop it
I'll
out.
volunteer.
Pop it out in Zulip so that we can.
Yep. Mark that down for me. I'll put out the poll on that. Cool. Excellent. Great. So just in the last couple of minutes, I guess I'm just going to wind it up, I think, since we've kind of covered that. AU core's good to go now, so we can expect that. Just highlighting some upcoming things that are potentially on the cards. we will be looking at a patient summary PSS and a AU Core R2 PSS at some stage once that's sorted out. So that'll be for those intended releases for the patient summary IG and the AU Core R2 IG.
Yeah.
So just to highlight, that will come. Yep.
Yeah, I got to draft those. We've gone through the scoping sessions pretty well, and I think that's fairly
Yep.
clear for patient summary so far. I just have been focusing on obviously getting core published, and I'll draft some of those and circulate it through the various co-chairs, etc.
Yeah, great. And so with the additions we just discussed, if there's anything else for the next meeting, let the FHIR Work Group co-chairs know, and I think we'll call it an end. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Brett.
Yeah, catch up in a couple of weeks. Thanks. See you later.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.